final game of the college football. Did we see the national championship game or just the second SEC championship game in 37 days?
The second
rematch?
SEC championship. Yeah, the rematch.
Did we just see the middle game of a 3-game series? Do we need the rubber match now after
we actually should have a rubber match, should we? Yeah. I don't really. Well, actually, no, we don't need one.
Well, it's like this one counts, but the previous one kind of counted, but not really. So yeah. Now this one really counts. But the whole thing that annoys me about this is if Georgia had just beaten Alabama the first time, we wouldn't have had to deal with this the second time. We would have had another opponent, as opposed to seeing this game twice in 37 days. Notre Dame, I think, would have made the playoff.
Yeah, Notre Dame would have been.
I'm sure you would have been excited about that too. But
yeah. Well, until they actually played Georgia and got mauled themselves. So.
Yeah, it would have been ugly, we know, but at least it would have been not a game we already saw. It turned out a little better than I thought. I was not looking forward to this national championship for many reasons. I'm not an SEC fan. We just saw this game, as I mentioned. It just seemed like a boring matchup. I also assumed that Alabama was just like they always do, going to beat up on Georgia, and somehow Georgia was going to shit the bed, just like they always do for the past 4 decades in the most critical moment. But I thought I was right in that the game was boring. Alabama was going to be okay as they led, did they lead 9-6? The joke kept coming across. Yes. The halftime score was 6-9, which people love to point out anytime they can. Nice. But everything changed going into the fourth quarter as I was considering going to bed early on a Monday evening, as that game was not worth watching to that point. But everything changed at that point. The game suddenly got interesting, and suddenly Georgia wasn't playing the role that I was convinced they would, and playing the doormat once again. It ended up being an incredible fourth quarter, a fun time. I had of course, no rooting interest necessarily, but it was interesting to watch. I'm hoping you stayed up at least through the fourth quarter, or were you considering this thing going to bed the same way I was?
Well, I wasn't considering going to bed. What happened is my original plan, and if I had stuck to it, I would have been really well off. My original plan was to bow out of the first half and only watch the second half, but I decided, no, you know what? I'm going to watch this game. And in hindsight, I should have just stuck to my original plan, because everything that was important, really happened in the fourth quarter. Yeah. And, it looked for a moment there like Alabama was going to steal another win from Georgia. They finally got a touchdown and took the lead after a Georgia turnover, right? Was that when they took it?
That was the turnover where Alabama barely knew they were even recovering a fumble. That was the weird like forward pass that wasn't a forward pass that went straight out of bounds, and the Alabama player nonchalant grabbed the ball just because it happened to be in front of him, kept his foot in bounds just accidentally. That was not an attempt at an athletic move or anything, or trying to stay in bounds. His toe just happened to stay in the field of play when he got control of the ball. So that was just one of the more ridiculous things I've seen in a national championship game. But that's another point at which I thought, oh, of course, Alabama is just going to win this game by accident. They're not even paying attention. They'll win this game somehow. But that's literally when everything turned.
Yeah. And then, I think you probably expected the same thing I did. I expected Georgia to come out and go like 3 and out and like wilt. And instead, they just, like 5 plays later, scored a touchdown. And that was kind of like it. That was it. They just took all the momentum back in that game and rode it right out to the end of the game that ended in pretty much a pick 6. So
the emergence of Stetson Bennett took control of that game. By the way, I mean, is there any more fake Southern quarterback name than Stetson Bennett that you can?
I know, right?
It seems like he should be playing for Texas, though, if anything, not Georgia, but with a name like that. But
yeah,
I mean, they were the 2 best teams. I mean, I hate to admit it, but they're the 2 best teams. That's just how it was. So that at least there's some justice in that. It was a good game, entertaining game by the end. Finally, we had to sit through about 3 hours of a snooze fest. I think we were both calling it via text. But so I think in the end, the playoff worked. It wasn't ideal. I'd like to see some changes, as we've talked about all year, with a 16 playoff. I'm not sure how that would have changed necessarily this outcome. I don't think we would have seen a SEC championship rematch if we had six teams the way this one worked out. So there's lots of talk about how to fix, or how to change the playoff. Everyone wants to expand it dramatically. The 16 team playoff, 12 team, 8 team. Again, I'm a proponent of the 6 team. I think the 8 team probably is going to be the one that makes the most sense, or the one that will be the most realistic, I think, because that's the one that adds all 5 power conferences, automatic bids. Then there's 2 at large with 1 group of 5 conference candidate in there as well. I think that's the one that solves the business problems, solves the business side of it, at least for the conferences, as we've seen the Pac-10 and the Big 12 get left behind, and they have an interest in staying in this for sure. So
right.
That actually could have come to fruition this week, as the conference leaders and Notre Dame president, or probably the athletic director, I'm not exactly sure who Notre Dame's representative at these meetings is, but they met on Monday before the national championship game to discuss exactly that, how to expand the college football playoff. I believe the TV contract is up after 2024. So just in a couple of years, and that would be their opportunity to expand. The problem is those committee members cannot come up with a consensus, which needs to be unanimous. They can't come up with a plan that everybody likes. And the rumor of what has actually transpired is that the SEC, the Big 12, and Notre Dame's chancellor, athletic director, whoever it is, proposed a 12-team playoff, which I'm not a big fan of. I think that's way too many teams. That would have included, certainly Michigan State, which would have been nice, but I don't think they deserve to be in the National College Playoff. So Pittsburgh would have been in it at that point, those kind of teams. So that's not the solution, in my mind at least. But the reason it didn't get passed is because the Big 10, Pac-12, and ACC shot it down. And you might recall those names, those specific groups in a grouping, because they were the ones that formed an alliance essentially this summer, just before the season started, against the SEC, who was taking a position, using their bully pulpit and kind of taking over college football, as they have been the best conference. But they were attempting to shape the future of football, and that's when the Big 10, ACC, and Pac-12 stepped up and said, "You're not so fast." And now we're seeing that come to fruition. Those two sides have definitely drawn lines in the sand. I'm not sure I've heard the reason why the Big 10, Pac-12, and ACC rejected the 12-team proposal, other than it's what the SEC wanted. And that's going to lead to a lot of trouble, I think, just going for, just starting now and going forward. Did you hear anything about this meeting? Or
I knew the meeting was taking place. I didn't know. I didn't read about the outcome. I do find it interesting, though, that Notre Dame and the ACC are split.
That's a weird one. I think why Notre Dame is on the side, especially for expanded playoffs in any form, is because they have an easier path if it's especially a 12-team playoff than they would even in an 8-team playoff. And this is a little complex to think it through, but there are going to be 5 automatic qualifiers in any 8-team playoff system, which automatically says, almost automatically says, the whoever loses the SEC championship game and whoever loses the Big 10 championship game are going to be the 2 at-larges, most likely. Then you have a group of 5 component where that would almost, I think that would be written in that there's got to be one group of 5 in that final 8. Well, that doesn't leave any room for Notre Dame, or that would leave possibly one spot for Notre Dame, which they'd probably be fighting for the Big 10 championship game loser for that final spot. So it behooves Notre Dame to go to a 12-team playoff. Specifically Notre Dame, I think, is where this comes from. So I think that's the only reason they would be split away from the ACC. And the only reason I can think the ACC would be against this is because they have aligned with the Pac-12 and the Big Ten as I think wanting to shoot down anything the SEC wants to do right now. So I think that's the only logical explanation I can come up with. There might be a lot more politics and other things going on, and there might be some inaccuracies with that reporting, but that's what I've seen so far, at least. So I just think this is going to be fascinating going forward. Like I don't really want expansion. I could live with 6 teams. I don't really want more than that. So it's funny because I think the own powers that be that want this to happen are kind of going to be their worst enemies trying to go forward, because they're just going to fight amongst themselves and not figure out how to expand it. It's just going to perpetually be a 4-team playoff. I could see that happening. So I thought that was fascinating to see this week. Well, I don't know when the next meeting will be or how they figure out a compromise, but I think we've seen some lines in the sand drawn, and we'll see how that plays out from here.
More to come on that.
I think the final thing we need to talk about are the final rankings for the season after the bowl season and after the national championship. Your Notre Dame Fighting Irish finished number 8, which is probably I got to assume that's a disappointment considering you were on the verge of making the playoff. You finished the regular season at number 5 and subsequently dropped to number 8. So your Notre Dame's aspirations are always higher than most. So I think a top 4 is where you were looking at a successful season. But my Michigan State Spartans finished right behind you guys at number 9, which just makes me think how much better it would have been if we actually got to face off in that Fiesta Bowl instead of you against Oklahoma State and us against Pitt. Because we finished the year right neck and neck. It would have been fun for this podcast for one thing, but I think it would have been a great bowl game in that Fiesta Bowl. But I don't know if you had thoughts on where Notre Dame ended up.
I mean, I think with the win, they probably end up number 2, which is crazy when you think about it, but they probably do. They probably should have really been behind Michigan State, but for whatever reason, they're not. They're 8.
You do have the 2 losses after the bowl season, so
yeah,
Michigan State had the 2 losses as well, but
they won their bowl game. So I just, it's fine. I mean, it's great for a top 10 finish, but
it's such a weird ending to your season too. Just with the departure of Brian Kelly, which is a net positive, I think, but with a new coaching regime, it's just kind of a strange season. But I think,
and it looks like Freeman's not having any trouble poaching coaches from other teams right now. Yeah. So I think that coaching staff's coming together nicely. So I'm optimistic on their future. But yeah, I mean, again, I was like, they should have won that game. They could have won that game anyway. They definitely could have won that game, having a 28-14 lead at half, but they didn't. And it's just so funny how, they probably, they would have definitely been in the top 4, but I really do think they probably would have ended up with the number 2 spot overall. So,
well, I mean, Alabama's got that, and Michigan was number 3. So I don't know if you would have jumped then with the win necessarily, but you think you jumped from number 8 all the way to number 2 with the win?
Yeah, well, we would have been at 5. And we would have won, and Michigan and Alabama both would have lost.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Well, the revolving doors of history will never know.
Word Hole Media.